There's a moment in every person's life when the fog lifts, not slowly, not gently, but violently, like 1,000 illusions dying at once, like the comforting lies you've whispered to yourself for years suddenly choking on their own dishonesty. And in that moment, when your eyes finally open, you don't feel relief. You feel pain. You feel naked. You feel betrayed. Because the truth has claws, and clarity is a kind of fire that doesn't ask permission before it burns away everything false. This is why most people run from it. They don't want clarity. They want comfort, dressed up as clarity. They want confirmation, not confrontation. They want to be told they're almost there, even when their life is built on sand. But clarity doesn't care about your feelings. It's not interested in keeping you warm, it's interested in waking you up. And to wake up, you must first be shaken. You must face the mirror you've been avoiding. You must stare down the person you've become. Not the polished version you show the world, but the unfiltered reality. The resentments, the laziness, the distractions you pretend are duties. The story you've repeated so many times, you forgot it was a story. Clarity shows you that, and it hurts, because it reveals the distance between who you are and who you could be, between what you tolerate and what you were born to conquer, between the shallow waters you keep splashing around in and the ocean your soul keeps whispering about when everything else goes quiet. Clarity doesn't arrive with gentle music and a cup of tea. It arrives like thunder in the silence. It shakes your world by showing you the cracks you painted over. Because until you feel the ache of awareness, you'll never change. And yes, clarity will make you grieve, not just the lies, but the time, the years you spent playing roles you never auditioned for, the habits you called personality, the relationships you clung to because the truth was too terrifying. They were keeping you small. But here's the secret. Pain is not the enemy. Numbness is. Numbness is where dreams go to die slowly. Clarity rips the bandage off. It says, look, not to punish you, but to free you, because you cannot heal what you refuse to see. And you cannot transform what you continue to defend. The moment you stop justifying your limitations is the moment your life begins to accelerate. But there's a price. It's the death of your old identity. And every part of you that survived on excuses will scream. They'll say, but I had no choice. I was doing my best. It's not my fault. It's too late. No. Clarity whispers, you're not a victim. You're a participant. You didn't choose all your pain, but you did choose your patterns. You didn't write every chapter, but you've kept rereading the same ones, hoping the ending will change. And suddenly you realize something brutal. It was never the world that needed to change. It was you, your standards, your choices, your self-respect, your boundaries you keep moving when loneliness shows up, your voice you keep silencing so others don't feel uncomfortable. You've lived too long trying to be liked instead of trying to be honest. You've lived too long being understood while misunderstanding yourself. Clarity comes with a knife, but it's a sacred one because it cuts away what is dead. It slices through the noise. It pierces through the fake smiles and empty affirmations. And for the first time, you hear your own voice again. The voice beneath the conditioning. The voice that doesn't beg, doesn't prove, doesn't chase. It just speaks truth. And you realize you've known the truth all along. But it's easier to act confused than to act with courage. Because clarity demands action. And action demands loss. Loss of approval. Loss of distraction. Loss of stories that made you feel safe. This is why clarity hurts before it heals. Because it demands that you stop hiding behind potential. It demands that you answer the question you've avoided your whole life. What would my life look like if I stopped pretending? Not improved, not upgraded, not optimized, transformed. Because improvement without clarity is just rearranging furniture in a burning house. You don't need hacks. You need honesty. You don't need motivation. You need confrontation. You don't need another plan. You need to bury the old identity that's been dragging behind you like a ghost chain. But here's the miracle. On the other side of that pain is peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of alignment. The peace of no longer living two lives. No more hiding. No more performing. No more apologizing for your standards. No more building shallow castles just to win approval from people who don't even know your soul. Clarity will burn, but it will also build. It will reconstruct your character with bricks made of truth. It will forge your mind in the fire of responsibility. It will introduce you to the version of yourself you always sensed was buried beneath the noise. And when that version takes the wheel, your past won't make you flinch. Your future won't make you anxious. Your present won't make you ache for escape. Because finally you're awake. Finally, you're whole. Not perfect, not fearless, not flawless, but whole. Because when you stop running from clarity, you return to integrity. And from that place, you don't just exist. You lead, you create, you become the storm and the shelter, the wound and the healer, the fire and the forge. And that is where your real life begins. Because the real life was never out there. It was never hiding in the next achievement, the next relationship, the next applause. It was always buried beneath the noise you were too afraid to mute. And when the noise finally fades, when clarity tears the curtain off, you don't become someone new. You become someone true. Because clarity doesn't invent you. It reveals you. It peels back the compromises you called growth. It strips away the masks you wore so long you forgot what your real face looked like. And beneath all the strategies, performances, and narratives, there is a pulse, there is a presence, there is you. The part of you that never needed validation, never needed to beg, never needed to convince the world of your worth, only to remember it. But remembering hurts when you've spent your life trying to forget. Forget the failures, forget the betrayals, forget the version of yourself that settled again and again for less than you deserve. So clarity drags those memories back into the light, not to torment you, but to show you what happens when truth is neglected. When you choose harmony with others at the expense of war with yourself, and here's where it stings most. You realize the pain you're facing now is the one you postponed for years. It was never gone. You just delayed it. You drowned it in distractions. You dressed it up as ambition. You numbed it with smiles and spiritual sounding nonsense. But pain delayed is not pain avoided. It is pain compounded. And clarity, it arrives with the bill. It says, look at the cost, look at the years, look at who you could have been. And for a moment, your chest tightens. You grieve not just for the pain, but for the wasted potential. The silence that should have been a scream, the maybe one day that became never. But before you collapse under that grief, something strange happens. You feel the weight, and you don't break. You rise, because finally, the war is honest. Finally, the enemy has a name. And it's not the world. It's not your past. It's not the people who left you or the chances you missed. It's the lie you protected. The identity you wrapped in chains and called who I am. And now clarity stands at your door not as a thief, but as a liberator. It doesn't knock. It kicks the door in because it knows what's on the other side. A mind built on truth, a heart unafraid to feel, a spirit no longer for sale. That's what clarity offers, not comfort, but capacity. The capacity to face your life without flinching. The capacity to walk alone, if that's what truth demands. The capacity to say no, not with guilt, but with grounded authority. Because when you stop lying to yourself, the world loses its power to manipulate you. You're no longer pulled by praise. You're no longer shaken by rejection. You don't need to be understood. You need to be aligned. That is clarity. Not a perfect plan, but a purified lens. Not certainty, but honesty. And honesty is where power begins. But only if you let it cut. Only if you let it end the illusions. Only if you're willing to sit with the discomfort long enough for it to teach you something real. Because the truth is this: your life was never meant to be a performance. You were not born to fit in. You were born to remember who you are. And who you are is not confused. Who you are is not lost. Who you are is simply buried under years of noise, fear, and approval seeking. But the shovel has always been in your hands. And clarity, painful, piercing clarity, is just the invitation to start digging, to unearth the fire, to unleash the knowing, to walk into the storm, not to be destroyed, but to be remade. And when the dust clears and the echoes settle and the people who loved your mask more than your truth fall away, you'll find something unshakable. You, unfiltered, unapologetic, unbreakable. Because clarity doesn't just strip away what's false, it arms you with what's real. It returns your time. It returns your voice. It returns your boundaries. It teaches you to say, this is who I am. Not because I've proven it to you, but because I've remembered it in me. That kind of clarity, it burns first. Then it blinds. Then it rebuilds. And when the rebuilding begins, you no longer build for appearances, you build for legacy. You no longer chase love that doesn't recognize you, you become love that doesn't abandon yourself. You no longer shrink to fit into rooms that hate your fullness. You walk out and build the house that only truth can enter. And every step forward after that, it feels like home. Because clarity, once accepted, becomes the compass you never lose again. Even in chaos, even in heartbreak, even in the fog of everyone else's confusion. You see, you know, you walk, and you never again confuse pain with punishment. Because you've learned the pain of clarity is the pain of rebirth. And the only thing more dangerous than breaking is never breaking at all. Because to never break is to never shed the layers that were never yours to begin with. It is to walk through life armored in illusion, defended but disconnected, successful but hollow, surrounded but unseen. And maybe that's the part that no one tells you. Clarity doesn't just show you the truth. It shows you the price of ignoring it. It shows you the cost of comfort disguised as wisdom, the cost of pretending not to know what you know, the cost of acting confused when the answer is already burning inside you. Because confusion is often a choice, a mask, a stall tactic, a convenient pause between the life you hate and the life you fear. But clarity rips that mask off with brutal tenderness. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't knock gently or speak softly. It storms in when the lies have grown too loud and says, enough. Enough shrinking. Enough second-guessing. Enough settling for a peace that requires your silence. Clarity is not polite, but it is sacred. And sacred things rarely arrive without some destruction. You see, before it rebuilds you, it must tear down everything false you've worshipped. The false peace of keeping quiet to be accepted. The false strength of staying busy to feel worthy. The false humility of dimming your light so no one feels uncomfortable in your presence. Clarity isn't here to make you agreeable. It's here to make you authentic. And authentic doesn't mean loud. It means honest. It means aligned in public and private. It means your actions match your truth even when your truth makes people uncomfortable. Especially then, because if your truth offends those who only loved your silence, it was never love. It was convenience. It was control. And clarity doesn't let you stay controlled. It liberates you. And with that liberation comes responsibility. Responsibility to no longer betray yourself, to no longer say yes when your soul says no, to no longer carry guilt for walking away from what no longer fits. Because here's what clarity teaches you. In the stillness after the storm, you are not a mirror for other people's comfort. You are a fire. You are a sword. You are a boundary that breathes. And when you finally step into that truth, you stop negotiating with your own knowing. You stop asking for permission to be who you are. You stop needing signs, because the clarity itself is the sign. And it's been whispering to you in every quiet moment, in every feeling you've suppressed, in every conversation where your soul went silent, in every room where your energy shrank and your intuition screamed. And now you finally hear it, not because the voice grew louder, but because you finally got quiet enough to listen. That's the paradox. Clarity doesn't shout, it waits. It waits for you to stop running. Stop performing, stop distracting. And the moment you do, the moment you sit with the discomfort long enough to let it speak, you realize something that shifts everything. The truth doesn't hurt you. The resistance to it does. The delay. The denial. The delay is the suffering. Because deep down you already knew. You knew the relationship was draining you. You knew the job was shrinking you. You knew the version of yourself you kept showing the world was only a fraction of what you meant to be. You knew. You just weren't ready to pay the price of becoming whole. Until now. Until clarity made it more painful to stay the same than to change. And once you cross that threshold, there's no going back. You can't unknow what you now know. You can't unsee the gap between your life and your potential. You can't unfeel the ache of misalignment. And that's when the real work begins. Not to fix, not to please, not to decorate the cage, but to destroy it. To dismantle everything you built on the foundation of fear and replace it with something real. And real doesn't always feel good at first. It's awkward, it's lonely, it's heavy, but it's yours. And there's a quiet kind of power in that. Because now, when you speak, it's your voice. When you choose, it's your will. When you rise, it's not to be seen, but to be free. Free from the war of inner contradiction. Free from the split between who you are and who you perform to be. Free from the approval that once felt like oxygen, but now feels like poison. Clarity does that. It replaces your craving for acceptance with a craving for alignment. It trades popularity for purpose, noise for knowing. And when that trade is complete, something irreversible happens. You become dangerous, not to others, but to every system that fed off your confusion, to every relationship that thrived on your smallness, to every belief that depended on your silence. You become the person they warned you about, the person who doesn't fold under pressure, the person who doesn't shrink for comfort, the person who doesn't abandon their truth just to be tolerated. And that person can't be manipulated, can't be bought, can't be broken, because they've already broken and survived it, because clarity hurt them, but it also healed them. And healing, real healing, doesn't make you soft. It makes you clear. And clarity, once it has healed you, becomes your shield, not one made of armor, but of alignment. Because when you live in truth, you no longer flinch at exposure. You no longer dread being seen because there is nothing left to hide. No secret fears governing your choices. No unspoken doubts pulling strings behind your smiles. No fractured self behind a mask, just you. Whole, honest, present. And from that presence comes power. Not the loud, performative kind that screams for attention, but the silent, grounded kind that commands respect without demanding it. The kind that walks into a room and doesn't wonder who they need to become to be accepted. Because when clarity lives in you, you bring yourself everywhere. No more shape-shifting, no more bending backwards in hope someone will choose you. Because now you choose you. And what once felt selfish now feels sacred. You start to realize that protecting your peace is not avoidance, it's wisdom. That saying no is not harsh, it's honest. That walking away is not weakness, it's waking up. And yes, some will misunderstand you. They will call your clarity cold, your honesty arrogance, your peace distance. Because those who once benefited from your confusion will feel threatened by your clarity. They will miss a version of you that stayed small for their comfort. But you won't, because now you know shrinking to fit always comes at the cost of your soul. And no version of love, success, or belonging is worth that price. So you let them go. You release the approval, the roles, the applause, and in that release, something wild and rare begins to return. Your energy, your attention, your life, all the pieces of yourself that were scattered in people, places, and performances, they start to come home. And as they do, you begin to remember how it feels to stand tall in your own presence. Not to impress, not to dominate, but to exist fully, without apology. That's what clarity gives you. It doesn't decorate your cage, it hands you the key. And the moment you use it, the world changes. Not because the world changes, but because you do. You no longer respond from wounds. You respond from wisdom. You no longer chase love, you embody it. You no longer beg life to be easier, you become stronger. And in this strength, you start to see all the pain that clarity brought was the pain of returning to yourself, to the voice that was silenced, to the fire that was smothered, to the boundaries you were taught to feel guilty for holding. And now you hold them with grace because you understand clarity without compassion becomes cruelty. But clarity with compassion becomes transformation. You stop judging who you were. You stop hating the years it took to wake up. You see that version of you not as a failure, but as a seed, a necessary stage, a bridge, a becoming, because even confusion served its purpose. It bought you time, it gave you contrast, it made the truth unmistakable. And that's the gift. Clarity doesn't just heal you, it humbles you. It strips you down not to shame you, but to show you what was never real. And once you see it, once you feel the freedom that comes with being undeniably yourself, there's no going back. You no longer fear the truth, even when it hurts, because you've seen what denial costs. And that cost, too high. So now you live differently. You walk differently. You speak with a fire that doesn't burn, but illuminates. Not everyone will understand it. But the ones who do, they're on the same path. The path where confusion is no longer glorified as depth, where pain is no longer avoided but honored, where silence is no longer submission but reflection, where clarity is not a threat but a gift. And the more you walk that path, the more you realize you don't need to convince anyone of your clarity. You embody it. And that embodiment becomes your message, not through force, but through presence, through peace that doesn't need to be explained, through actions that speak louder than your old identity ever could. Because when you live in truth, you don't need to yell it. You just are it. And that is where freedom begins, not with a scream, but with a stillness. Not with conquest, but with clarity. Because stillness is not emptiness. It is authority without aggression. It is presence without noise. It is knowing without needing confirmation. And that kind of knowing deep, quiet, immovably, what clarity ultimately leads you to. A space inside yourself that no longer negotiates. A ground beneath your feet that no longer shakes when others disapprove. A rhythm to your life that no longer speeds up to keep up with those who are lost. Because when clarity lives in you, you no longer ask, am I enough? You ask, is this aligned? You ask, does this cost me myself? You ask, is this peace or just silence pretending to be? And when the answer is no, you walk away. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, not with a grand announcement, but with grace, quietly, clearly. Because now you are no longer trying to win. You are trying to live without distortion, to live without pretending, to live in a way where your soul doesn't have to flinch at the life you've built. And that life, it doesn't start outside you. It doesn't start with perfect timing or perfect conditions. It starts the moment you choose to stop performing and start remembering. Because clarity doesn't come from more information. It comes from less noise, from subtracting the false, from unlearning what never served you, from cutting the ties that tethered your worth to what others think. And when that subtraction is done, what's left is you, not the idealized version, not the wounded version, just the true version, the one who knows when to stay silent and when to speak fire, the one who knows when to build and when to burn, the one who doesn't collapse under loneliness because solitude has become a sanctuary. And that's something confusion could never give you, self-trust. Because before clarity heals the world around you, it restores your relationship with yourself. You begin to trust your eyes again. You begin to trust your voice again. You begin to trust you, no, not because you have a reason to justify it, but because your body knows. And your body, your instincts, your intuition, your gut, they were never wrong. Only overwritten, dismissed, silenced in favor of logic, strategy, or fear. But now, they rise again. Now, your body becomes the compass. Your spirit becomes the map. And your mind no longer needs to argue against your soul. That's the integration clarity brings. It doesn't split you in half, it reunites you. And when you are whole, decisions become simple. Not easy, but simple. Because now the question is no longer what will they think, but what will I become if I betray myself again? And that is a question that silences all the noise. It brings you back to the crossroads every single time. The place where your future is shaped by 1,000 small choices. Speak or swallow. Stay or go. Bend or rise. And every time you choose truth, even when it costs you something external, you gain something internal. And that gain is not visible, but it's unmistakable. It's the calm in your chest, the fire behind your eyes, the quiet certainty that you are no longer living anyone else's life, only yours. And the ones who truly see you, who truly love you, will recognize that clarity. They won't fear it. They'll meet you there. Because real love does not require confusion. Real connection does not ask you to twist yourself to fit. Real peace does not come at the cost of your voice. So you stop chasing what confuses you. You stop forcing what drains you. You stop waiting for permission from people who never had the authority to define you in the first place. And in that stopping, your real life begins to start. Not louder, not faster, not bigger, but truer. And that truth is not just a gift, it's a responsibility. Because clarity, once it finds you, doesn't just transform your life. It demands that you carry that light into everything you touch, into your relationships, into your work, into your decisions, into your legacy. Not as perfection, but as alignment. So you no longer live to be impressive. You live to be integrated. You live in a way that your words, your walk, your work, and your witness all speak the same language. Truth, not polished, not rehearsed, not performed, just truth. And that truth, that is the real freedom you've been searching for all along. Because freedom was never the absence of struggle. It was the absence of self-betrayal. It was the moment you stopped editing your truth to be digestible. The moment you stopped apologizing for seeing what others refused to look at. The moment you stopped abandoning yourself just to be invited in. That is the real clarity when you no longer seek the exit, but the center. You no longer ask, how do I escape this feeling? You ask, what is this feeling trying to teach me? You lean in, you listen, you stay. Because clarity doesn't numb, it awakens. And awakening isn't a sunrise, it's a reckoning. It's the flood after the drought. It's the scream after years of silence. It's the truth rushing back into places you kept hidden so long you forgot they even existed. And when that happens, when the numbness dies and the awareness floods in, you don't become more certain. You become more honest. You start admitting what you were too scared to say out loud. That you knew, that you felt it, that the red flags weren't invisible, you just painted them white, that the ache you called anxiety was actually misalignment, that the guilt you carried wasn't a burden, it was a message, that your body knew before your mind would admit it. And now all of it returns, not to punish you, to reclaim you, because clarity is reclamation. It is taking back every piece of yourself that you handed away for the sake of being tolerated. Every boundary you blurred in the name of peace. Every instinct you ignored so you wouldn't be too much. Every time you swallowed the truth to keep the illusion alive. Clarity gathers all those fragments and says, come home. And when they down, all the parts of you return, you feel it. You feel the weight drop. You feel the strength return. You feel the silence become sacred again, not as avoidance, but as alignment. And from that place, you don't need to fix anyone. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to defend the life you choose. Because the life you're building now, it defends itself. It's built on something unshakable, your knowing. And that knowing, quiet, steady, relentless, guides you like a compass buried beneath every storm. Even when you're unsure, you're no longer lost. Because clarity is not the absence of confusion. It's the refusal to abandon yourself in the midst of it. You still feel fear. You still doubt. You still stumble. But now you return faster. You recover cleaner. You rise clearer. Because clarity doesn't make life easier, it makes it yours. And when life is yours, even the pain becomes purposeful. Even the endings feel like beginnings. Even the silence feels like song. Because you are no longer performing for a life that isn't designed for who you truly are. You are building a life that can hold the full weight of your truth. A life that doesn't shrink when you speak. A life that doesn't collapse when you change. A life that doesn't punish you for evolving. And that kind of life, it starts when clarity becomes non-negotiable. When you no longer choose comfort over consciousness. When you no longer sacrifice truth on the altar of acceptance. When you no longer let confusion wear the crown in your kingdom. because your kingdom is built on fire. And fire doesn't just burn, it forges. So let it forge you. Let clarity do what comfort never could. Let it strip you. Let it shape you. Let it send you back into the world, not to be understood, but to be undeniable. Because the moment you choose clarity over chaos, truth over tactics, presence over performance, you become unstoppable. Not because of what you've gained, but because of what you've given up to become real. Because becoming real is the most radical act in a world addicted to illusions. A world that teaches you to trade your essence for approval, to polish your wounds into branding, to convert your silence into currency, to bury your truth beneath productivity and call it purpose. But when clarity rises, you no longer buy in. You see the game. You see the mask. You see how often you were taught to sell your soul just to feel seen. And you say, no more. No more sacrificing your peace to keep the room calm. No more shrinking your brilliance to soothe fragile egos. No more delaying your decisions, waiting for a sign that was already inside you. Clarity breaks that spell. It breaks the need to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. And with that choice comes a different kind of power. Not loud, not performative, but undeniable. You don't need to shout to be heard anymore. Your alignment speaks louder than your arguments ever could. You don't need to explain why you've changed. Your presence explains everything. You don't need to make sense to others. You make sense to yourself. That is the shift. From external validation to internal authority. From performing your worth to embodying it. And once that shift happens, everything changes. Not because the world becomes easier, but because you stop betraying yourself to navigate it. You stop abandoning your knowing in conversations that demand your silence. You stop saying, I'm fine, when your spirit is screaming. You stop walking into rooms where your presence is only welcome if it's diluted. Because clarity doesn't just guide you forward, it filters everything around you. It reveals the friendships built on convenience, the partnerships built on performance, the routines built on autopilot. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You start saying no, to be rebellious, but to be real. You start walking away not to prove anything, but because staying costs too much. And the more you do, the clearer you get. The world doesn't get quieter. You do. Because you've stopped arguing with what your soul already knows. You've stopped negotiating your truth for temporary comfort. And you've started listening to the parts of you that don't speak in words, but in weight. The weight in your chest, the tension in your jaw, the pressure behind your eyes when you smile while breaking. Clarity listens to those things. And then it teaches you to honor them, because your emotions were never the enemy. They were messengers. They weren't here to trap you. They were here to teach you. But only if you slow down enough to feel. Only if you get still enough to see. Only if you get brave enough to listen. And that's the paradox of clarity. It doesn't arrive through force. It arrives through surrender, through the quiet collapse of what no longer holds, through the decision to stop pretending you don't know what you know. And when it comes, when clarity fully lands in your body, not just your mind, you exhale, not because everything's fixed, but because you're finally telling the truth. And the truth, no matter how sharp it feels at first, is always a relief. Even when it ends things, even when it hurts people, even when it costs you everything you thought you needed to be okay. Because what it gives you in return is yourself. And when you have yourself, fully, clearly, unapologetically, there's nothing left to chase. Only space to create. Only ground to walk. Only truth to live. And that is where life begins, not when everything makes sense, but when you make sense to yourself. Because when you make sense to yourself, the world no longer needs to. You stop bending your truth to fit someone else's logic. You stop editing your feelings to match someone else's comfort. You stop outsourcing your clarity to people still living in denial. And in that moment, when you no longer need your truth to be understood, you finally own it, fully, quietly, absolutely. It no longer wavers when someone questions it. It no longer dilutes itself in rooms where confusion is the currency. It no longer waits to be validated by the very structures that once taught you to doubt yourself. Because clarity is not a group project. It's a solitary becoming. It's a moment you walk alone, not as punishment, but as purification. Because confusion is often a crowd. But clarity is clean air. And not everyone is ready to breathe it. So some will leave. They'll fall away as your truth rises, because the moment you stop playing their game, they lose their script. And that's okay. Let them go. Because clarity isn't about keeping everyone. It's about keeping yourself, your peace, your integrity, your voice. And it's only when you stop sacrificing those things that you start to feel safe in your own presence again. Safe in your own body. Safe in your decisions. Safe in your silence. That's what clarity gives you, an unshakable home inside yourself. One that doesn't collapse when others disapprove. One that doesn't beg for company to feel whole. One that doesn't crumble when old patterns try to seduce you back into confusion. And when they do, you'll notice. You'll feel it immediately. Because clarity sharpens your sensitivity. You notice the energy shift. You feel the pressure in the tone. You recognize the manipulation behind the smile. Not to judge, not to fight, not to prove, just to choose. To choose differently, to choose cleanly, to choose yourself without flinching. Because clarity, real clarity, doesn't make you reactive, it makes you sovereign. You no longer explode, you exit. You no longer explain, you decide. You no longer chase, you align. And in that alignment, your life begins to reflect you, not the version of you that performed, but the one that's finally rooted. Rooted in truth, rooted in presence, rooted in the quiet, holy knowing that you are no longer negotiable. Not because you've become rigid, but because you've become real. And reality doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to sell itself. It just is. Unmoved, unbothered, unapologetic. And that's when your clarity becomes contagious. Not because you preach it, but because you live it. You walk into a room and speak with the kind of calm that only comes from no longer betraying yourself. You hold eye contact, not to intimidate it, but because there's nothing left to hide. You take up space not to dominate it, but because your presence no longer shrinks for anyone. And the people still living in confusion will feel it. Some will resist it. Some will resent it. But others will recognize it. They'll remember something in themselves they forgot. They'll feel their own truth stir again. Because clarity doesn't just free you, it frees others through you. That is a silent revolution. Living your truth so clearly that it invites others to question their lies. And you do this not through force, but through being. Being consistent when it's easier to fold. Being clear when it's easier to be vague. Being honest when it would be more profitable to perform. Because clarity has nothing to prove but everything to protect. It protects your peace. It protects your standards. It protects the life you're no longer willing to lose for acceptance. And as it does, you become something rare. You become someone who cannot be moved by the temporary. You become someone who doesn't shatter when things end, because your foundation isn't built on keeping things, it's built on keeping truth. And the truth will cost you. but confusion will bankrupt you. So choose clarity, even when it's sharp, even when it's lonely, even when it asks you to stand alone in the fire of your own convictions. Because that fire, it doesn't burn you, it purifies you. It burns away the need, the mask, the apology, until all that's left is you, the undeniable you. And the undeniable you does not beg to be seen, because your very existence becomes a declaration. You walk differently, not because you've memorized confidence, but because your spine is no longer bent under the weight of pretending. You speak differently, not because you've mastered articulation, but because your words now echo from a place untouched by fear. You choose differently, not out of rebellion, but because what once felt necessary fitting in, dimming down, keeping peace at the cost of your own voice now feels unbearable. Clarity does that. It changes not just what you do, but what you can no longer tolerate. You become allergic to your own denial. You develop an intolerance for shallow conversations, surface-level connections, and performances dressed up as love. Because when you've tasted what it's like to live in alignment, even for a moment, everything that asks you to step out of it becomes intolerable. And it's not because you think you're better. It's because you've been buried before. You've been twisted into shapes that didn't belong to you. You've betrayed yourself for applause that never healed the ache inside. And you promised yourself, never again. So now, when something feels off, you listen. Not weeks later, not when it's convenient. You listen now, because you trust yourself again. And that trust becomes sacred. You no longer need to collect opinions before you move. You no longer need to consult 10 people before you walk away. You no longer ask for permission to do what your soul already confirmed. Because clarity isn't about knowing everything, it's about knowing enough to act, enough to move, enough to leave, enough to speak, enough to protect what took years to rebuild. And what you're protecting now isn't fragile. It's not some delicate idea of self-worth. It's the core of who you are. The knowing, the peace, the voice that used to whisper and now roars in silence. That voice says, you do not need to prove your worth. You need to stop proving your doubt. You do not need to explain your boundaries. You need to honor them. You do not need to justify your peace. You need to preserve it. And so you do, quietly, not as protest, but as practice. Because clarity is a daily discipline. It's not a one-time revelation. It's 1,000 tiny choices. To stay instead of escape. To listen instead of react. To pause instead of perform. To honor instead of please. And slowly, those choices stack. They become your rhythm, your compass, your way. And in that way of living, something powerful happens. You stop waiting for life to feel right, because it is right. Not perfect, not painless, but clear. And clarity, when embodied fully, brings with it a quiet kind of joy. Not the ecstatic kind that comes and goes with highs and victories, but the anchored kind, the steady hum beneath your chest that whispers, this is true. This is what real peace feels like, not the absence of problems, but the absence of pretending. And when you live that way, you're not just alive, you are awake. And once you're awake, you realize the cost of your former sleep. How many rooms you stayed in to be polite. How many truths you watered down to be liked. How many times you said, I'm okay, when everything inside you was screaming, no, I'm not. But you don't shame that version of you anymore. You bless them because they survived what they had to. They played the role until you were strong enough to write a new script. They kept the light on until you were ready to burn the whole stage. And now you don't act. You are. You walk into every space without armor. Not because you're naive, but because you're free. You've learned that clarity doesn't protect you from pain. It protects you from becoming your pain. It keeps you soft when the world tries to harden you. It keeps you honest when life tempts you to perform. It keeps you you, especially when it would be easier not to be. And that is your quiet rebellion. Not noise, not war, not resistance. Just truth, lived, embodied, uncompromised. And that is the most dangerous thing in the world. A person who sees clearly and refuses to look away. Because once you refuse to look away, life starts revealing itself for what it truly is. Not a performance, not a competition, not a checklist, but a conversation between your soul and the moment in front of you. And in that conversation, clarity becomes your native language. You no longer speak in avoidance. You no longer negotiate through confusion. You no longer translate your truth to be more palatable for those still afraid of theirs. You just speak from the root, from the marrow, from the stillness beneath the noise. And when you do, you realize something terrifying and liberating. Most of your suffering wasn't from being lost. It was from pretending you weren't found, from pretending you didn't see it, from pretending you didn't feel it, from pretending you didn't already know. Because knowing comes before readiness. And most people delay their lives not because they're confused, but because they're not ready to accept what they already know. That the relationship is done, that the job is draining, that the habits are hollow, that the identity they've built is too small for the soul trying to break through. But clarity doesn't wait for readiness. It arrives like a sunrise without apology, without permission, and says, whether you're ready or not, the truth is here. And when it comes, you are faced with a choice to ignore it and go back to sleep, or to let it strip away every lie you've made comfortable. And when you choose the second when, you let it strip you, expose you, cleanse you, you don't become someone new. You return. You return to the part of you that was never confused, the one that was always watching, waiting, whispering beneath the chaos. There is more than this. There is a deeper way. There is a wilder truth. And finally, you answer that call, not with grand gestures, but with simple, clear, consistent action. You stop lying. You stop rushing. You stop asking the world for answers you haven't asked yourself. And instead, you slow down. You breathe. You sit with what's real even when it's raw, because you've learned that pain is not the enemy of healing. It is the gateway to it. And clarity, once allowed to do its work, doesn't just change how you see the world. It changes what kind of world you're willing to live in. You no longer settle for polite betrayal. You no longer tolerate almost alignment. You no longer participate in your own suppression. You rise, not with noise, but with knowing, not to be seen, but to see yourself fully, finally, without distortion. And it's in that moment when you stop asking for clarity and start embodying it that the fog truly disappears. And what's left? Silence, simplicity, power. The kind of power that doesn't perform, doesn't pretend, and doesn't pause for permission. The kind that only comes from finally living in a way that honors the truth you always knew. Because when the fog is gone and only clarity remains, what you are left with is not just a new way of living, it is a new way of being. No more war between your truth and your survival. No more peace that requires your silence. No more pretending that almost is enough. You stand now where few ever dare to stand. In full awareness, in full responsibility, in full blinding honesty. And you realize this is what freedom was always supposed to feel like. Not soft, not sweet, not painless, but true. The kind of truth that doesn't comfort you, it calls you. It pulls you out of the illusion and places your hands on the tools of your own becoming. Because now, You're not asking life to carry you forward. You are carving forward with every decision that honors what is real, with every no that protects what is sacred, with every step that doesn't wait for consensus. And as you walk, you will lose things. You will lose attachments dressed as love. You will lose habits dressed as identity. You will lose versions of yourself that survived in darkness, but were never built for the light. But what you gain is everything. Your time, your energy, yourself, not the masked self, not the pleasing self, but the undeniable, unedited, unstoppable self, the self that doesn't flinch, the self that doesn't apologize for growing out of what no longer fits, the self that knows clarity is not a moment, it's a way, it's a fire, it's a vow that says, I will no longer dim my truth to comfort confusion. I will no longer abandon myself to be chosen. I will no longer delay what I know in my bones just because I fear what it might cost. Because the cost of truth is high, but the cost of avoiding it is your life. And so now you choose. You choose clarity. You choose peace that isn't paid for with pieces of your soul. You choose power that doesn't shout, but stays. You choose a life where your reflection doesn't look away, because it finally recognizes you. This is where the fog ends. This is where the noise dies. This is where the performance ends and the real you begins. Forever clear, forever whole, forever free.